Hello, everyone. It's Tamryn, and I have got the wonderful Thembi with me today. Thembi Bheka, welcome. It's so fantastic to chat with you.
I am so excited to be here, Tamryn, especially with you just having a baby.
Yes, just for those who are watching, so we're creating an episode of the Differently podcast, but of course you're watching us do that live here on the Differently Facebook group, and some of you may have seen that I've been expecting a wonderful baby girl who arrived on Saturday morning. So I'm being quite adventurous and doing things differently. She's here with me sleeping, so she might make a debut or she might not. Thank you for mentioning that, Thembi. Thembi, you and I met maybe 4 years ago now, I think it is, 3 or 4 years ago at a fantastic Jeff Walker event in the States. And I think our opening conversation is I was wearing this really flowing Ugandan print skirt, and you are from Zim originally and I'm from South Africa, so we had this connection over Africa, although you were living in Canada at the time.
Yes.
And are living in Canada again now, but in between you had a stint back in Zim, and I kind of want to start our conversation there because you have had an incredible journey. Your story is phenomenal, coming from Zimbabwe, starting online businesses, leaving nursing. I mean, there's so many things. I don't want to steal all your points away, but the thing that stands out for me is this incredible against all odds element about you sitting in your beautiful house now in Canada. I'm assuming you're in Canada now. Did you go back? Yeah. And having this incredible project, empowering people in Zimbabwe to become virtual assistants in this world of supporting online businesses. I'd love you to start there and kind of just weave backwards and just tell us, what are you doing and how is it that you've managed to do things so differently than the norm, particularly coming from Zim?
Thank you, Tamryn. And once again, thank you so much for being here. I am so excited, and thanks for everyone who's listening. I wish I could say it was unique. I wish I could say I am unique and I'm different, but I think I'm like everybody who just had a hunger and thirst to be something and to do something and to do something differently. If you know, I mean, you would know this, Tamryn, coming from South Africa, like back home, if you're growing up in Zimbabwe, which is just like South Africa, like in the really either rural areas or low income neighborhoods, life is tough and everybody is fighting hard to get out of that. If you are growing up maybe in Soweto, or you're fighting hard to get out of those shanty towns and to try and be a better person. And that's why I was really like, I grew up in the hood of the hood, and so it's like, okay, I need to get out, I need to fight, I need to get out. I am not continuing like this in this path, and that journey took me to eventually coming to Canada. Basically, when I came to Canada as a refugee in 2001. But I want to say something like in regards to this whole journey which we take. There's always angels in front of us who've done things differently, unlike like you are one who's having a baby right now who's 5 days old, and you're talking to me like, I'm like, oh my goodness, I could never do that. How do you do that? There's always angels who do things in front of us, and we look at those angels and we're like, oh my God, I want to be like her. Oh my God, I want to be like him. And that's really kind of how my journey started. I had seen people go to this overseas world. I was like, oh my goodness, people's lives, they were changed by just leaving the country. And I'm like, how do I do that? And at that time, Zimbabwe was going through a political situation. It hasn't stopped. It's still going through that. But at that time, I was like, let me just find a way to leave this country, leave this politics things, and just move to Canada. And that's really how I moved to Canada as a refugee. Do you want me to tell the whole story, or should I?
Well, I mean, that must have taken incredible courage.
It was hard. I think that's, I've done a lot of hard things. Every time you feel like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Every time you do something. But that was hard because I left my daughter. I had a daughter. I left my daughter when she was 10 months old.
Wow.
I couldn't, first of all, because I didn't know where I was going. I couldn't just take a kid and just bring her here. She was safer with my mom than she was with me to a foreign country where I didn't know anybody. So that was the hardest thing for me. And then I get here and it's a complete different country altogether. The culture is different. Everything is different. The weather is different. And one of the things which I started learning once I got here is that every time you move to a new country, and this will refer to me moving back to Zimbabwe, but every time you move to a new country, you're like a baby who's just been born. It takes like 3 years or 4 years for you to finally start walking perfectly. At first you're crawling, at first you're sitting, and then you're crawling, and then you start walking. And I didn't know this. I can't remember how I heard about this, but I didn't know this and I didn't realize this. Like, it even affected me when I moved back to my own country where I was born. I felt like a baby. And after 4 months, I couldn't be a baby anymore. I was like, I can't live here permanently.
This is tiring. I can really relate to that. I moved from South Africa to Luxembourg in Europe when I was really young, straight out of university. And that's not even an English-speaking country. And it took me, I would say, at least 2 years to feel okay, like familiar to myself again. So absolutely. That must have been even more difficult if you moved under circumstances that, you were looking for an opportunity and a better life. How did you find the courage to do that? Have you got any reflections on that?
I think I had no option. I think my staying for me was way worse than for me to leave. And when you're first in those situations with what's the worst that could happen, I'm in a worse situation already. What's the worst that could happen? I also have to say I was living a marriage where my husband at that time had 2 other wives. So I was wife number 3. And so really I had no option. I was like, it's either I'm staying in this marriage being wife number 3 or I leave.
Yeah.
So for me, leaving was better.
and fast forward 20 years basically. And just for some context for people who haven't met you, Thembi is a powerhouse woman. I mentioned that we met at a Jeff Walker event, which is a really significant community where you're basically a famous celebrity in the Jeff Walker world now. You've become an icon of what it can be like to work on a successful online project. You've got many followers all over the world, students all over the world in different subjects, and you are sitting in what looks like a beautiful home. So in 20 years, you have achieved something quite remarkable. How did you get from there to here?
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for the acknowledgement. Well, the first thing is when I first arrived here in Canada, I went to school to become a nurse. But I always, I think for me, it was the bigger why. It was the bigger why that kept me focused. My big why was to help the other Thembis I had left back home who were also stuck in relationships like me. And I said, I want to lift them up. I want to help them. So at first I went into nursing school because I was going to I trained to be a registered nurse. And after I graduated, I started the first paychecks I would send money home thinking, okay, I'm just going to help all these people. But eventually your lifestyle upgrades and the money is never enough. And you can't really sustain that. And I was like, I need to start a business. That's really how I got into real estate. I came across a paper which says, get out of the rat race, invest in real estate. I was like, I could make more money and send more money back home. And so I started investing in real estate. And it was during those times that I started realizing that sending money was never helping people. Actually, I was disempowering people. I realized that I needed to empower them by teaching them something. And so at first I started by boreholes, wells. Most people call them wells. It's a borehole back home. And I started building those. And I said, okay, I'm going to help these women and just build boreholes in Binga. That's where I started. Really not that great of a success. I mean, yes, it helped, but they still kind of needed help with starting the projects and all that stuff. I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? Then I said, what if I empowered more people on a higher level so that they can empower those people who are building bowls and doing the gardening stuff. And so I decided to start teaching women in Africa again how to invest in real estate. And that journey was hard because I was attracting the wrong people. I was attracting men instead of women. Nothing wrong with men, but that's not who I wanted to help. I just started attracting men. But what happens is I got a secretary who was working for me, who was taking this course as a woman. She couldn't afford to pay, and so she ended up working for me. And so she ended up being my VA. And so I was like, what if I taught them how to do what I'm doing? Mm-hmm. And that whole, so it's always been a journey. It's not like I came to Canada, I was like, in 20 years, I'm going to be teaching women how to be VAs. I had no idea how that was going to go. It was kind of a journey and a journey and a journey. And eventually it ended up being the situation where I said, maybe I can teach these women how to have online businesses. That actually was my intention. And I moved to Zimbabwe in 2017. I think I spoke to you and told you, Tamryn, I'm moving back to Africa.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. The hardest 4 months of my life again. Culture shock. Yes. Culture shock. And you know, Ann Wilson, we have a mutual friend, Ann Wilson. Ann Wilson said to me, Zim is hard. Are you going to survive? I'm like, I'm from there. I'll be fine. Little did I know. I'm sure. It was so hard. I basically had to come. I've only been to therapy twice. The first time is when I had a miscarriage. And the second time is after Zimbabwe.
Wow.
I had to go for therapy because it was so hard emotionally, mentally, everything. And it was during that process that I just decided, you know what, these women are so far off to even think of going online to start their online business. Why don't I just teach them how to be virtual assistants? So I decided to teach them to be VAs. And I had no intention again to start an agency. I was going to teach them how to be VAs and give them resources to go find a job. Well, after training them, nobody could find a job. They could look for jobs. Another different culture again. That's when I was like, okay, I guess I'm going to start an agency. And then I started an agency and I hired them. And basically that's really how I ended up having a VA agency.
The main theme that I've heard from what you've told me is you started something, you paid attention to what was happening, and then you adjusted according to the need. And although it's, it sounds quite simple when you describe it, I was doing this and then I realized that this is actually what people wanted, so I changed. That's not actually an easy thing to do. You have to be really aware and be really willing to change the direction of a ship in order to do that. I often use the analogy of following the breadcrumbs, like that story from Hansel and Gretel, where you notice the next crumb and then you go and then you go. And for me, that's a really important way that I live my life. And it sounds like you really followed the breadcrumbs of investing in property, teaching property, noticing it wasn't impacting women, noticing you were working with a VA, that there was a demand, that women in Africa could start online businesses, but actually that was too advanced, move back, VA business. I think that's really remarkable to have been so adaptable and pay so much attention to what was unfolding in front of you. Would you agree?
I didn't see it that way. I mean, yes, I followed the breadcrumbs, but when you are doing it at that time, you don't see it that way. You are twisting and shifting and turning in your bed thinking, oh my God, what can I do to change the situation?
Yes.
And
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because the lived reality is different, right?
Exactly. You have sleepless nights. And recently, I have had some sleepless nights too. It's not like the sleepless nights never ever disappear. I don't think they ever do, because so a friend of mine always says, new level, new devil. And because there's always a new level you're going to go through. Right now, my new level is managing team members and a big team. And I just hired a CEO. I just hired, like a new manager. And it's like, oh my God, how do I deal with that? I think there's new level, new devil. Do I regret it? No, I don't. But at the same time, it is not easy when you're going through that. And it is not, and the reason why it's not easy is because sometimes you don't even have a role model who's done the same thing like you do. You don't, we always feel like, especially for me as an African woman, I felt like there was no one who was, I mean, African as a Black African woman, not as an African American, as a Black African woman. There was no one I knew from Africa who with the same industry like I did. So I always gave these excuses sometimes when things were hard, that, yeah, they don't have the same background like me. They don't have the same culture like me. And I'm sure you do the same thing, Tamryn. Like, there's no South African I know who's doing the same thing I am doing right now.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I see kind of successful people, in fact, a lot of people I met at that same event have rocketed into, you know, the next level of their online business, and I'm like, oh well, it's so easy when you're based in North America because you can just meet all the people. So it's easy to tell yourself these silly stories which may or may not be true, but you know what, they're irrelevant to your own journey.